introduce you to Badly Licked Bear. Badly, hello. Badly is from California, worked as a curator and a nonprofit program director for 10 years in California before moving to the Pacific Northwest. And that's where they pursued their education. They were a working artist in the Pacific Northwest for many years in Washington and Oregon. Then they returned to California recently and are now working in the position of professor at Otis College of Art and Design. We met online in an artists group during the pandemic. So good things can come out of dark places. We've become friends, and we also share a love of critiquing media, pop culture, and film. Badly's writing was featured in the zine that was created here in residency, and I have a few copies if anybody is interested in that later. It featured the work of 10 queer artists from across the Pacific Northwest and neighboring states, including California. And now they will be presenting some recent work in their Hacked Comics series, A Game of Me, based off of Neil Gaiman's A Game of You. And I came to know Badly's beautiful and insightful writing and wry comics projects in which they comment on societal issues of gender and identity. And for your information, they also have 6 chickens.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for being here and thank the Salem Art Association and Jessica for making this happen. I want to say that I want to thank everybody for coming to Bush Pasture Park, which in Google Maps this morning I read as Bush Pleasure Park. I would like to suggest a renaming. I'm available to come to the next SAA board meeting to suggest a course of action. I would be lax or negligent if I didn't mention the political context of tonight's presentation. I would legally not be allowed to give this presentation in at least one state right now. I am not legally necessarily allowed to walk outside and speak publicly in at least one other state right now, and I'm looking at not being able to literally drive across the United States as the kind of person I am within the next several months. I'm giving a talk in Mississippi where abortion is effectively illegal right now this summer, and I literally do not know how I can travel to Mississippi or if I will legally be allowed to travel to Mississippi to give that talk. I can only say that we live in a really dangerous political time. My work exists in the context of that political time. My life exists in the context of that political time. I did not intend for this to happen. I apologize if you're all trapped in my dystopian subconscious. It's a whole other talk. And all I can say about this right now is I can no longer draw a map of the United States. I no longer know how to do that. I think there are many people who can draw a map of the United States. I think there are people who draw maps of the United States that are much larger than the current map of the United States is. And I think there are people like me for whom the United States is an incredible shrinking country. I'd like to follow it up with the closest thing that I ever give to a land acknowledgement as an indigenous person. We've been on this land since time immemorial, and we will be on this land after the United States, and the legal fiction of the United States is no longer in existence, regardless of any values the United States has. The nations that follow the United States, we will be on this land after those nations fail. We will be on this land after our own nations change and fail. So we are here and we will continue to be here. That is to say, I'm going to move on. I am an appropriation artist, and so the first part of this talk, tonight's talk is all about my comic work. I also work as a performance artist. I do all kinds of other stuff, but tonight is explicitly about my comic work. I'm an appropriation artist, and so this is my talk on my life in appropriation, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a new project that I'm doing, and then hopefully I get to talk with you. So why am I an appropriation artist? I'm a thief. I have always been a thief. I have stolen software my whole life. I was a shoplifter as a teenager. I have always been somebody who is like, and when I went to continuation school, I would slip up to the coffee, exact coffee, and you'd pay a quarter for it. I would like pour the coffee and talk up the secretary, who was this lovely woman, and then I would just like walk off without paying for it. Like I have always been on the VIP list and not paying to get in the door, and that is, I have that modality within me. The character on screen is a character named Barbie in the comic The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, specifically from the, what did I just butcher? Specifically from the comic A Game of You, which is the comic that I'm currently working with. Barbie is the character in the comic that resonates with me and the character I most identify with. And so, you know, what I do a lot of the time as an appropriation artist with works of comics is I hack comics, and I'm a writer, so what it means is primarily what I'm doing is editing, reordering, cutting down, whittling down, combining multiple comics into one comic to tell a story, usually about myself. And those stories exist in relationship to the comic itself. So, so I learned how to steal from Bob Flanagan and Kathy Acker. They're like really the two pillars of my artistic world. When I was a teenager, when I was a child, I was very influenced by Kathy Acker, who's a famous appropriation artist and author. She's also a terrible person as far as I can tell. I think she was a terrifying, malignant narcissist. And I love her. Bob Flanagan, I never had to know her, right? But I wished I did. Bob Flanagan is a famous performance artist, a BDSM practitioner, and writer and poet. And I love him most as a poet. And he was a huge influence on me as a young person. Again, demonstrating that you can kind of be anything and do anything. And so, what I like with them is they were kind of making art out of the world around them. Kathy is making art out of other people's books. Bob is making art out of like basically being ill. He was at the time of his death one of the longest lived people with cystic fibrosis. A lot of people with cystic fibrosis live much longer now than Bob did, but Bob was somebody who like was a happy warrior through that whole process and remains a huge influence on me. And so I tell stories that are in relationship to other stories because I don't believe there is any content of our heads that's not a story. I do not believe there are any facts in your head. I think you know about things that are facts, like gravity or like the wall. Like I'm not like that loopy, but I believe that's how the human brain is constructed. I teach storytelling by storytelling to students who are going into the media industry. So if stories get great or weird in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm sorry, there's hundreds of them out there, and I've touched all of them. And no, but I want people to understand that like that's how we communicate because I want people to be effective communicators, right? And then being a thief means I live by certain kinds of rules. I tend to think like that as a thief, I have a certain kind of ethics, you know? And I only take from things that have been already put into me, essentially. So I'm only working with materials in my work that are things that I have resonated with and in relationship to them. Like these things go into me and then they come back out of me. It's not such that like, oh, I work with the material in the world at my desk and I make it into something else. The material enters me in the form of the experience of the story, of how my life changes in relationship to how it has meaning for me, and then it exits me, right, in the form of my own work. And then how do I do this? So when I first really started encountering Kathy Acker's work, this is Kathy Acker at the right, she was like really enthusiastic about bodybuilding, and I love her for that. And so basically I'm reading Empire of the Senseless. I never read the whole slide, that's a terrible way of lecture. So I was reading, I hope you can read stuff. I was reading Empire of the Senseless and I saw William Gibson's words coming back out at me. I did not know what an appropriation artist was. And I knew William Gibson's work because this poor teacher's aide when I was in 5th grade had to hear me give an oral book report on William Gibson's Neuromancer, which is like the most awkward thing for a 10-year-old to like because like I feel differently on Neuromancer now, but like at the time I was like just immense, immersed in the cool of it, right? In like the cyberpunk cool of it. And this poor young woman that was her job. They like kind of like didn't know what to do with me in school. I would just do oral book reports every week for whatever novel I had read that week to this poor woman. And so like a lot of stories really influenced me at a very early age. And so like when I'm doing this work, it's like I've read Gibson, when I encounter it in Kathy Acker's work, it's resonating with me, it's a feedback loop. So when I'm doing the kind of like comic or text jamming where I'm writing things that are entirely composed of quotes from other people or something, what I'm doing is I'm just loading the material with things that have some kind of symbolic resonance. That can be really chaotic and messy or intended just for style, or it can be really deeply personal. And that's the technique that I use. I kind of like tend to call this technique signifier jamming when I'm teaching it in school, and it's not like, it's more like I'm jamming a lot of signifiers into your brain. I'm like really just hammering a lot of meaning into you. So the other side of this is that I have temporal lobe epilepsy, and this affects my work, right? I don't really perceive time and memory the same way that you do. I have seizures all day long. They're very small, and most people don't notice them. I have what are called absence seizures, where I might be staring off into space. I kind of jitter. They interface with my body when, like, in the most intimate of moments. So I don't experience orgasm like a lot of other people do either, right? So that's how I function. And people who have temporal lobe epilepsy sometimes have something called Geschwin syndrome, which is named after a dude, like all medical conditions. And so which just means I have an epileptic personality. So I tell stories like other people who have temporal lobe epilepsy tell stories that are circular, right? I tend to like go off on ridiculous tangents, and then they connect back to the original, and people are kind of like, well, how did you do that? And it's like, well, that's how I think. So I think in terms of loops, and I tend to think my experience of the world is to cross and to cross again. I'm always building patterns and connections in my brain, whether I like it or not, right? It's not fun. I'm glad I understand this as like a neuroscience phenomenon, and not like, and not as like a visionary phenomenon. Like I'm aware that a neuroscience phenomenon is making me perceive reality slightly different than it is, and then I use that neuroscience phenomenon as a storyteller with some consciousness towards audience, because I've been doing this for a long time and I know what I'm doing, in order to like hopefully be an effective communicator and not just like a spectacular one, right? But that's a huge part of my life. So this is just early work for me. My early work involved a lot of pixels. I was like one of these people like who was doing a lot of like retro NES pixel art, like as a young person. This like work was like, I had shows for this like right before Gallery in 1988 came into existence and stuff. And then I sold a self-portrait of myself in an autobiographical piece, because these works were autobiographical. Like my dead name is excised from this presentation of the piece, for example. These works were autobiographical, and they were a lot of the violence of my childhood. And I was selling like what I felt like emotionally sincere work, and this family came and they gave me $500 in cash, and they had a baby in an Iron Maiden jumper, and like this was for the baby's room, and I'm like, oh fuck, that's a career, right? And it's not my career, and so like, you know, there's another world where like I really went for this. This is like me in like 2003. Like I have like absolutely like this crust punk dreadlocks there. Yeah. For 5 years, I made work about avian flu and pandemics specifically, and then, so again, sorry that you're trapped in my horrifying subconscious. But all of this work that I was making at the time, this is not me, this is an artist named John Michael Gill. I would often hire performers to kind of play roles in my work, because I was a curator and nonprofit director in the community. So it's like if I was sitting at a desk trying to like perform this weird CDC worker role, like people would want to talk to me about like real world stuff. So I would like hire Nicholas Klenick and be like, okay, I want you to tell half of the people this fact and the other half of the people this conflicting fact for the next 3 hours. And I would give him a little bottle of like booze to like nip on so he gets But actually, the reason I use this slide is like all of these like graphics were always like, you know, a lot of them were appropriated. This hand washing slide, you may have seen stickers of this. This is the same sticker that's used today. These, like, a lot of the graphics that were used for like hand washing and pandemics, avian flu, are actually the same vector graphic files that are used by the government during, at least at the beginning of this pandemic, before there was like an industry in producing like pandemic stuff, right? In the same way after 9/11, there was like an industry in producing like security businesses, cybersecurity, whatever you want. So I'm not here to necessarily critique pandemic response, but it is a phenomenon. I was primarily concerned with how we communicate about pandemics. I wasn't trying to warn people this was going to happen. When I made this work, I was very concerned, like a lot of people were, about SARS, MERS, avian flu, all of these kinds of things. And then there was a notion that we should have statistically had a very serious pandemic that killed around 2 million Americans in the 90s. The truth is that pandemic happened in the 80s, and it was a pandemic, and it was AIDS, right? Just people don't want to think that AIDS is a pandemic because 30 years, 40 years on, people still want to pretend that it didn't affect everyone. They want to make it seem like it was an epidemic because it only affected some people. It only affected gay men, right? But it didn't only affect gay men. The 3 categories of people who were most affected by AIDS were gay men, women, and black men and women, right? Which, you know, and it affected a lot of people beyond that as well. So I'm kind of interested in the naivete of myself at this time. We're jumping forward way into the future. Before the pandemic, I kind of pivoted from being, to making like online hacked comics. So when the conceptual artist met the comedian is a webcomic I was doing for like 2 years. That's a hacked version of Watchmen. That's a critique of the art world. So it's like, it tends to be like 6 or 7 page chapters. It's the most primitive thing I did. It involves the least amount of editing in terms of the original images. It's mostly writing, which is good because Alan Moore is a verbose writer and I'm a verbose writer. And so I was able to like really work with this stuff. Art School Confidential is one of the later pieces in it. And like this is actually one of the more this is one of the more autobiographical works in it. I'm not suggesting a parallel between myself and Rorschach for a variety of reasons, particularly gender, right? But I do use my birth mother's name I interject it into his name. I'm an adoptee, I'm a transracial adoptee, so my birth mother's name is on a birth certificate that I'm not legally allowed to see. It was sold in 1978, and I'm not in a closed adoption, and I'm not legally allowed to see my own mother's name. Right? And I have a handwritten piece of paper that I got out of the bottom of a box in the garage that someone forgot about with some notes from a lawyer. That's how I know my mother's name. Right? So I am interjecting a sense of personhood into this, and this becomes, if you're familiar with Watchmen, this is a psychiatrist interview with an MFA student who has burned down their graduate program. so like, you know, again, this is like cathartic. In that sense, like, you know, it's like, again, so there's different aspects of it. The character in this, the conceptual artist meets the comedian that I actually identify with is the comedian character who I've repurposed to be myself as a retired, dejected curator, which is what I am, someone who's rejected the contemporary art world to some large extent, you know, and is very cynical about it. And the conceptual artist is Dr. Manhattan, if you're familiar with Watchmen, who's this big blue guy with godlike powers, and he represents Mauricio Catalan, the banana guy. And so, yeah. And again, I'm sorry you're living in my subconscious, but I published the comic where I named Elon Musk and Grimes' child the day before they announced the pregnancy. So this kind of gets to what I do. This is the last physical exhibition I had before the pandemic. This is Cassandra. This is all text, and we're not going to go into this, but this is text from Videodrome, William Gibson, and Giorgio Agamben. And this is like a 27-foot long painting. It's all text painting. This is all painted by hand with computer cut stencils. I love painting by hand. I do lots of large, huge, I will like take over a whole building and paint text all over it whenever someone gives me the chance. I love doing this kind of work. And so this is a 3-part conversation that mixes those things up. So I did Cassandra, I had a solo show, 3 weeks later the world closed. During the pandemic was a great time to be a comic artist. The same gallery commissioned me to make this comic for this mail art project they did, and this is when I started making physical comics. This is based on Frank Miller's comic, Give Me Liberty, which stars which features a young woman named Martha Washington, who's kind of like living in America where Reagan is always forever president, and America's become this terrifying empire, and like, but it's also fracturing and collapsing, and it's surreal. It's his attempt to like do his own Watchmen. It's not as good. Frank Miller's like pretty right wing, and this is kind of an interestingly right wing comic. These are out of order slides, but this is me again working with these characters. What I've been doing. At the same time, I did the Antifa series, which was this really sincere attempt to create a right wing media presence for. Whereby Antifa recruiting materials where Cobra from G.I. Joe represents Antifa would somehow make their way into right-wing media, because these people are probably dumb enough to like believe this shit, right? And this stuff, for some reason, these pieces have been exhibited in a number of museums. And it's one of those weird pandemic things where you just email someone a file, and then 6 months later someone sends you back a poster tube, and it has your work in it, and you're like, okay. But I love this one. I love this piece to death. It's the Baroness, who's just super cool, and she's finding this young girl, and she says like, that's how Antifa found me. So she's like recruiting a child. I need to like just rewrite this panel as like, if the Baroness is the world's most awesome trans femme, and just like update it for 2023. Same thing, not Antifa, just change it to trans femmes. So Quarantine, this was part of something by Mark Fisher that I did for a while. I did this a single 1-page, again from the Frank Miller material. That comic, Frank Miller's comics, he's the guy who did Dark Knight Returns. He was that guy who kind of like made the, like, when you see RoboCop and there's like commercials in the dystopian movies, that's the Frank Miller style. So this is all the news media reports cut out of that comic and put into one long form narrative about like, basically America collapsing during the pandemic, and then it ends with like Trump like as patient zero with COVID, but like in a coma, right? All right. Then my collaboration with Michael Hansen, I can't even go into this. I write stuff on the internet, and this guy named Michael Hansen makes comics based on it. So it's kind of like, this is how I write scripts. I just say things, and this guy turns them into stories, and then he takes the paintings and he goes down to the sunken city in San. This is a whole other presentation. He goes down to these ruins in San Pedro and he paints the individual panels and my words on these huge slabs of concrete that collapsed in this landslide in 1930. This is a great place for like teens to smoke pot or like make out. It's one of those places at the edge of the Pacific. This is the future though. This is like civilization in ruins, and it's right there in Los Angeles. If you're like from San Francisco or been there, the Sutro Baths might have the same resonance for some people, like other places that have been abandoned. I love this panel. You can't really see it well, but that's my skeleton, right? He did this whole series, I'm the last person alive. And it's like, I got to go down to this place I did graffiti myself in high school and see like my own skeleton. That's like as close as I'll ever get to being at my own funeral, and I love him for that. He's a weird guy, and there's like 7 of these huge slabs. And he goes every week. So when he's doing a story every week, he repaints them completely. So basically, like a lot of my working method is, this is like my contemporary art practice, is like I say things without any interaction. This guy materializes them into comics, and then he cave paints them in a play. Yeah, so I've really checked out from the art world. I'm not making anything you can buy without a crane, and you have to be one hell of a thief. So that's kind of what I do. And this is a longer slide that I've used for another presentation, but I want to make it clear, as an appropriation artist, my work is intentionally both derivative and transformative. That's what I want to do with stuff. When it comes to like what I do in terms of a thief, is I don't really give a fuck. I don't care if people sue me, right? I don't care about any of that kind of stuff. I'm going to make the work I'm going to make. I don't make any money. And it's weird, as someone who writes comics, like I usually write comics because a museum commissions me to write a comic, which is not like how Gail Simone or any of the other major American comic writers work. Like DC just pays them a salary, right? Okay, and then I want to get on to A Game of Me, which is what I'm working on now. So there's a Sandman comic called A Game of You, which is right here. Does anybody know A Game of You as a comic? Okay. Sandman is this comic, there's like these deities called the Endless, and they're kind of like super gods of concepts like dream and death and delirium. A Game of You is a 1992-1993 comic. It ran over a course of a year, and it famously features a trans femme character named Wanda that's inherently problematic. If you're familiar with the history of trans feminine representation in media, you've probably seen an image of Wanda. You may have seen an image where her dead name is crossed out in lipstick on her gravestone, right? So Neil Gaiman has been really criticized for this, but as well as praised for it. It's complicated, right? It's 1992. And I think he did a pretty good job in terms of transgender representation. And I'm not here to come at him or something. But like, one of the things I realize as someone who like rereads things and works with material from their life is how much of this comic's narrative, like words from this comic, phrases from this comic, embedded themselves in my daily language. And actually like my sense of like queer cosmology and metaphysics and stuff embedded, it's like, it comes as much from this as it does from anything in the world. I'm very interested in representation right now. I'll talk about that again in a second. And as someone who's interested in representation, I'm aware when you destroy a people's history or prevent them from having a history, they will invent their own. We saw this in the 1960s within the Black civil rights movement, or not the civil rights movement, adjacency, like the sense of like inventing connections to Africa. Like people desperately realizing that there is a historical gap between their relationship to Africa and like to some degree cooking up their own mythologies and stuff like that, which is totally fucking legitimate. And you see this also in the 1960s and 70s in particular in the radical fairy movement in the queer community, right? Where you see like, I've been to radical fairy ceremonies where like there's Greek gods being like honored here, and then we're doing tarot, and then all this shit's happening at the same time. You know, and again, a people denied their culture, denied their history, will invent their own. And I feel as somebody whose identity is particularly atomized by my own life's experience, and who like is like a micro minority of like one most of the time, like I constructed my sense of cosmology, epistemology, and metaphysics out of things like comic books and film and TV and movies and video games as much as I did from my Jewish religious education or my experience as an indigenous person, right? So I wanted to work with this and make this about myself. And where I found representation is in Barbie. So this comic is mostly about dreams. The thing that I wrote for the zine is mostly about dreams because I collect other people's dreams of me. If you do dream of me at any time, I desperately want to know about it. I catalog these. And I sometimes use them in my work without asking, so just FYI. And people's, you know, like, and people, I get some pretty frank dreams about the kinds of interactions that people have with me in their dreams. You know, so this character, this is Barbie, in the Game of You comic, she occupies a dream world, which is a real place that she goes to. As a teenager, as somebody who was like really more fucked up than I knew at the time or know now, right? Like I was powerfully dreaming all the time to the point where like the idea of going to sleep and occupying the same landscapes that I experienced night after night as if I went to a different place that I could go to again and again was like a really powerful experience for me, right? And I actually began to question like whether I could just like live in that world, you know, and then my life in the outside world at times seemed less than my life in dreams. So I relate to the character of Barbie. There's obviously like comic book reasons why stuff is happening, but I wanted to transpose myself and tell my own story about pretty much that period of my life and my relationship to dreams and the formation of my identity through her. So when I'm writing this comic, basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to isolate her in the comic, and I'm trying to write from her perspective. My work has gotten a lot more sophisticated, so like in this whole blizzard in her dream sequence, there's actually accompanied by 3 other characters that are like stuffed animals from her childhood. I'm going through basically panel by panel and erasing and redrawing them so that she's alone, right? Because I want her to be completely alone. So I have to like redraw the comics now. I draw with a mouse. I just want to say that because if you know how stupid that is, but I like kind of tend to work 1 pixel at a time in this very zoomed in way. And so, you know, again, I'm editing things, I'm changing the size of things. I decided to start with this part of the comic, which is stupid because I simultaneously have to edit out all these characters, and I also have to fucking redraw the snowflakes whenever I blank something out. I have been redrawing snowflakes and like getting these gray areas to not look like, oh, I just hit paint bucket gray, which is how you would do it if you were making the comic. You just say, oh, make it gray, and then you put the snowflake filter over it. I actually have to go down to the pixel level and kind of match the resolution of the scan. So this is incredibly, stupidly meticulous work that does not need to be done. I could learn to draw, but I'm too stupid for that. So the other thing I want to say is that, like, so in this comic, I'm actually talking about the graphic novel itself, which I've never done really for the comics. There's stuff in this, like, how I'm supposed to identify with Barbie's friend Wanda, who's the pre-op trans one with the man's hands, not Barbie. I've never been able to relate to Wanda. I have no fucking, I don't care. Like this, I was in 1993 when this came out. I came out in 1994, right? I came out as trans in 1994. I was already obviously queer to people, right? I came out to one person, and then, you know, like how it is, you come out to one person, and then you come, you know, and then you don't come out to anyone for years or something like that, right? I came out to like an ex-girlfriend of mine in the smoking bathroom of the continuation school where we had been exiled together. You know, we were the youngest students in our school district ever admitted to continuation school, which is like, you know, that's a thing. Anyways, so like, I hadn't really articulated stuff at this time, and but I also, the characters I feel like in this comic are Barbie, Thessaly, and Hazel. Hazel's kind of a butch dyke who's kind of confused. She's like chunky, and she's like short hair, and she's just like a young person who's confused. And I'm really looking forward to like illustrating this whole conversation that she has in it. And then Thessaly is actually the most like sort of controversial character in the comic because she's like an ageless witch. She's like tens of thousands of years old, and she's like traded a lot for immortality. She's not an ethical person, but she's also a TERF. Like, so this comic is famous for this point in it where a bunch of women go walking, they draw down the physical moon to the earth and they go walking along the moon's road into Barbie's dream, you know, via Thessaly's witchcraft. And Thessaly tells Wanda, the trans, you can't walk this road. So it has an explicit, it's debatable whether Neil Gaiman is talking to that character or Thessaly is talking. It's also debatable whether Thessaly is right. Right? I mean, yes, she has power over the moon herself, but it's questionable whether Thessaly might have just said that. So, but I actually identify with Thessaly for other reasons, right? And so, you know, again, I'm going to be working with those 3 characters in this. You know, and then again, I'm working with stuff for myself. So like this same age is when, and I'm really working with myself at a point in time. This is where, when I was 16, I destroyed every photographic image that exists of myself. There are none. There are like, I should not say, there's a couple like AYSO, like those strip photos from when you're in a soccer uniform that like turned up in a drawer, right? But there are no images of me as a child. There are very few photographs of me really between the age of 16 and now. I appear very rarely in photographs for obvious reasons that you can probably figure out. And so like in the comic, she's in the cave, and this is, let's just zoom in this is all my writing. And then in this version of it, she's encountering the photographs of herself that she's destroyed, and they exist in her dream, you know, and then then she's finding this sort of scroll, and this scroll actually contains like notes from like my origin, my point of origin, including my mother's name. So I'm really trying to wrestle with my own identity in this, with the idea of where we find representation, where we don't find representation, and I'm expecting this comic to be in the 30 to 50 page length, and hopefully I'd like to have it finished by this summer, because this is the content of season 2 of The Sandman, and it wasn't intentionally timed to this, but I really felt like if I didn't do this now, then it would feel weird doing it after that. And I'm really scared that that's gonna happen. They're gonna make season 2 of The Sandman, and they're gonna try to be like really fucking on the ball about bringing in Wanda. And I'm really freaked out as to what that's gonna be like. I'm really freaked out about how I'm gonna feel represented or not represented by someone's attempt to basically correct historical errors in the way trans women were presented in the early 90s. It actually frightens me. I have mixed feelings about The Sandman. The best thing I can say about The Sandman TV series is that like it gives me a chance to like look at John Cameron Mitchell. But yeah, I'll watch John Cameron Mitchell in anything, although I have not seen him as Tiger King yet. So I'm a huge fan of his work. I saw Short Bus in the theaters twice last year with him giving an intro, and I sometimes like joke that I'm stalking John Cameron Mitchell. He has no right to still be that thin. He has no right to be that thin. Anyways, so you know that's my tone. So that's what I've been working on. That's a preview of it. So what I'm interested in right now is representation and the invention of representation. All of my writing that seems serious at this point, that isn't like imminently political, it seems to be about that. And I'm working on a text that I'm hoping to get I'm hoping to get some time to write a book that talks about this, because I want to write something that's a resource for my students on this. That they need, that doesn't exist in the world, and I believe that representation is where you find it, and like love is where you find it, like Madonna, love is where you find it, and that can be anywhere. That can be anywhere. I mean, we had a conversation earlier about like many of us have found representation in places where we're definitely not supposed to find it. You know, where it would be inappropriate. In the queer community, the entire oeuvre of John Waters is a place where people have like found representation for decades. Right? We're not supposed we're not supposed to be devoted to that stuff, but I'm no less devoted to that material. I'm no less devoted to female trouble that now in 2023, no matter how problematic that film is, than I was in like 1992 or 1991 when I first saw it as a kid. So I'm interested in talking with my audience here. Like, what does that mean to you? Like, what does finding representation mean to you? Where do you find representation, and what is representation? And if you're looking for more of me, I have a .net site, badlylickbear.net, and I also have a Substack now, badlylickbear.substack.com. I do a lot of writing these days, and people are like, put all your writing in one place. And so I did that a couple weeks ago, actually, and it's weird because people started giving me money. Like, I made it clear, like, if you subscribe to this and pay, you get the same shit anybody else gets. And then people started giving me money, and it makes me feel like my writing is being supported in that way. I obviously need a lot more support to like have the time I need to do more writing work. But and that's not a plea for cash. But this room won't make the difference. I need like 500 more people, right? Tell your friends. But like, that's where a lot of my older writing is getting collected at this time. One of the things that I can tell you is somebody who, I publish a lot. I had a blog that was nationally read until 2010, and I stopped that. And because Facebook and social media killed that kind of independent writing. Your audience was all on social media, so your site had no comments. You had all this traffic but no comments. It felt like you were talking to yourself, and it was lonely. And so a lot of my audience is actually like on Facebook for some reason, because like the people I tend to be in my network tend to be like academics. So it's like a lot of my peers tend to be like women in their 60s to 70s who are like, you know, academics. And that's that's where that age demographic tends to be social media wise. And so I get a lot of feedback from there. So you're like, why are you writing on Facebook? I'm like, well, the people who really value me and give me good feedback on my work are there, so I write there. But also Facebook's a great place to be shadow banned. You can't use the word sex work on Facebook. You can't use the word suicide on Facebook. I could say something that's designed to help people, right? And it's positive, but if a computer detects those words in sequence, it doesn't make the feed. And when you can't talk about sex, and I talk about sex all the fucking time, right? You can't, I've done 2 memorial posts for Mira Bellwether, you know, who wrote the zine Fucking Trans Women and gave us the word muffing. And like, right, yeah, you know, so stop talking now. And no, twice, and it's like, oh, it gets like 3 likes, because why? Because no one is seeing it. No one is seeing it. And so at this time as a person, I'm like, I guess this isn't working anymore. Like Facebook is inherently, again, like I can't draw the map of the United States. On the map of Facebook, every part of me that's like critical and queer is somehow being slowly erased. So it's like de Kooning's erased drawing, except like the erased drawing is like my community, right? That's a terrible analogy, but I'll end on that. So thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate that Badley's work can be seen and you can become a patron at their Substack. It's badleylookfair.substack.com. Then the next event in the Queer Artist Series is May 20th. We have a lovely presentation for you entitled A New Idea Won't Kill You. From Rasa Clayworks, and Rasa Clayworks, they are a clay production company, or not clay production, ceramics production company. They make exquisite porcelain and stoneware vessels, and they will be coming to talk to you about their experience as 2 transgender women who have been through a variety of media, including filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, architecture, and now their clayworks. So it's really an opportunity to, and they're also locally based in Yahats.
You did it, yeah.
Yahats. Okay, I'm sorry. And yeah, so May 20th, and then there's another continuation of the series every other month until 2024.